So thank you so much to everyone joining us from across Scotland, the UK and around the world as we come together to celebrate the woman who I think many of us gathered here already agree may be justly considered the greatest poet of the 20th century and indeed into the 21st. Dr Kathleen Raine's work encompassed continents and centuries, poetry, prose and paradigm-shifting academic research, and we're honoured to have a multidiscipline, multi-talented panel here and now with us tonight to share with you why we all believe that her legacy must be treasured, particularly here in Scotland. So let me start by saying a tremendous thank you to the Scottish Poetry Library, our online host for this evening, and especially to Tony, who, as we've heard, is on hand tonight. Keep everything running smoothly and watch for your questions in the chat box. In preparation for tonight, we've actually been delving into SPL's collections to learn more about Kathleen Raine's connections with the library. We'll be discussing her deep-rooted links with Scotland in detail as the evening goes on. But for now, let me just highlight the fact that she not only supported the library's creation, but actually paid a blizzard to attend its opening night, showing an intrepid dedication to poetry that doesn't surprise any of us here tonight. So my name is Kirsten MacQuarrie and I'm the author of a forthcoming novel, The Rowan Tree, which is inspired by a chapter in Kathleen Raine's story that has especially deep Scottish roots, perhaps more on that later, and by my absolute conviction that Scotland needs to do more to reappreciate and reappraise the extent of her contribution to our country. I am thrilled to be joined by a diverse panel of fellow raindrops, so let me introduce them briefly now before handing over the floor. So first we have Dr Jenny Messenger, who's a journalist and the author of a forthcoming title within Bloomsbury's Classical Receptions and 20th-Century Writing series, Kathleen Raine, Classics and Consciousness. Kathleen's links with Scotland and with the natural world more conceptually open up fascinating spaces of consciousness, and I know that Jenny will be illuminating them for us shortly. We're hoping, here's perfect timing. I can see that Rebecca has just joined us. I'll give her a moment to catch her breath. I'll also introduce our next panellist in the meantime, Dr Caroline Watson, who's a scholar whose PhD focused on Kathleen Raine and who presented her research at the 2022 International Conference, A Homage to Kathleen Raine, at the Sorbonne in Paris. Now, I was fortunate enough to have a little cameo in Caroline's session as we highlighted Kathleen's two children's books, more on them later. And in every sense, I know that Caroline is very well travelled indeed when it comes to exploring Kathleen's story. Now, let me see. I think, Rebecca, are you with us? I think I just saw you joining and that was perfect timing.
Yes, thank you, Kirsten. A few problems there, but I think I'm successfully in. I hope you can hear and see me.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I'll just, while you're getting yourself together, I'll just give a quick introduction to your work as well. So Rebecca Rowe is a composer whose new work, Within the Living Eye, which premiered with Glasgow School of Art Choir as part of the groundbreaking Composeher project just last month, set 6 Kathleen Raine poems to music. And it's thrilling for me to announce that a recording is soon to be made. So if you missed that premiere performance, you will still shortly be able to hear this exceptional transcendental work. Now, I was lucky enough to attend that evening, and I think set to music, actually, the terminology I used in our booking form really doesn't do this project justice. Kathleen Raine's words truly became music, or rather were revealed as the music they always were in Rebecca's hands. So I can't wait to hear her reflections on the lyricism and harmony, however one defines it, that is in Kathleen's poetry and prose. And I do believe that we have also just been joined, perfect timing yet again, by Professor Grevel Lindop, who's a poet, biographer, essayist and chair of the Temenos Academy. I know we have a number of members of Temenos with us tonight, which is wonderful. The educational charity founded by Kathleen Raine in 1991 and evolving from her journal Temenos. So this creative home for what she termed the arts of the imagination continues to thrive, a powerful tribute to her vision. And we'll learn later on just what imagination, imagine a capital I there, meant to her and how you can support Temenos's work in honouring it to this day. Your own questions, comments, reflections are all very welcome this evening, so please pop them in the chat throughout. We'll come to as many questions as we possibly can at the end. But for now, I, and I'm sure all of you as well, are very eager to hear from our panel, so let's get started. And my first question is actually, could I start by asking each of you how you first discovered Kathleen Raine's work and came to connect with her over? Caroline, perhaps I'll start with you because you were also lucky enough to connect with the woman herself.
Oh, I've just managed to disappear myself. So.
Oh, well, I can still see you. So.
What have I done?
Oh no.
Well,
can you not see the rest of us? We can see you.
I can't see anything, so I don't know what I've. I don't know.
We can see you fine and hear you fine, Caroline.
Oh, okay, all right. I'll just have to speak to
We'll
it.
play around in the background and make sure
Yeah,
you hear.
yeah. I don't know what I've done, but anyway, it's just all gone for some reason. Well, I'm just speaking to a blank screen, so it's a bit strange. But
I promise we're here, Caroline.
yeah. I came across Kathleen Raine's work in the Blood Axe book of contemporary women poets, and I was given it in Christmas 1995, and it was her poetry and her little bit of biography that really struck a note with me, and eventually I started to put together a thesis for an MPhil, which then became my PhD on Kathleen Raine, but it also included 4 other poets. Edwin Muir, so that's the Scottish connection really there, because she knew the Muirs really very well, and wrote beautifully about Edwin Muir and really championed his poetry. And then the other poets were David Jones, also an artist, Vernon Watkins, and David Gascoigne. And yes, so that was my entry into her world. I mean, curiously, I actually became more concentrated on those poets' writing and what she wrote about them than her own work, which I've actually come to a bit later. So I think, you know, so that's how I started out. So
amazing. That's quite a quartet to contend with. And actually it's funny because I've noticed, reflecting on Kathleen's connections with Scotland, I'd noted down something she wrote about Edwin Muir, but it really could apply to herself as well. I think that stands out as the greatest and perhaps also the most typical Scots poet of his time. All this because of an unswerving inner certainty, an integrity and indifference to fashion that made him never seek to impress or please, but only bear witness to the truth.
yes, I might just add just briefly, and then the last letter that I received from Kathleen Raine before I met her for an afternoon tea was I was giving my talk to change from an MPhil to convert to a PhD, and I spoke about Edwin Muir and Kathleen Raine, and she said, "I wish you inspiration on the day you give your first paper. It is auspicious that you have chosen Edwin Muir, and in brackets, and me, I hope." Which is typical of her modesty, really, about her own work. So,
I wish you could know that 100 people that we sold out tonight, because didn't she say to you something like, with your PhD, no one will read it if I miss it?
Yes. Don't bother. No one will read it.
I'm very glad you did bother. Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Perhaps I could come to you next, Grevel, because of course you will have many equally wonderful letters from Kathleen Raine too, I'm quite sure.
Yeah, I had quite a number, and in fact, they've now been lodged in the John Rylands Library in Manchester, so they are accessible for anyone who wants to do some research there. I felt that was safer than hanging on to them myself, you know. Yeah, I first came across Kathleen because the first volume of her autobiography did that thing that sometimes happens with books. It just kind of jumped off the shelf in the library into my hand when I was looking for something completely different. And I opened it up and read the first few words, and I just thought, I've got to read this book, you know. I couldn't put it back. And I went on and read the rest of the autobiography. Second volume, I discovered on a bottom shelf in somebody's house in Edinburgh. One night, looking for something to read, I actually crawled underneath the grand piano to get at this shelf, and blowing, there was another volume of Kathleen's autobiography, and I sat up, if that's the word, all night underneath the grand piano, reading this book from cover to cover because I was so gripped I couldn't stop. So that's how strongly she got to me. And then a few years later, an American called Robert Eddy, who was editing a journal about mystical literature, came to see me, and he said, "I've been talking to this poet Kathleen Raine in London, and she's looking for more poets to contribute to her journal Temenos. So, you know, why don't you try?" So I sent some work in. Kathleen accepted some of it, and I started being a regular contributor to Temenos. And then eventually I took it over and edited it for a couple of years before the Temenos Academy started. So my first meeting with her was in 1985. And it's kind of carried on and largely taken over my life since then. So, you know, be careful what you wish for and which books jump at you off a library shelf, because they can change your life.
Oh, I love that. I think that's the quote for this evening already. I hope somebody noted that down. Be careful what books jump off the library shelf. I'm very glad that that did. And I think, Jenny, that's something that you can really empathise with, especially with Kathleen's autobiographical work, which you've spent, you know, within your research, you've engaged with extensively already, haven't you?
Yeah, no, definitely. I was just thinking, like, yeah, because I think I started working on her, yeah, a number of years ago. I wasn't totally sure that I'd still be working on it now, but here I am. Yeah, she just kind of gets into your soul and yeah, doesn't let go. But yeah, so I came across her. I think I was about a year into my PhD studies, which was in classics. So I was looking at the influence of Neoplatonic philosophy on a number of 20th century writers, and then I sort of kept seeing Kathleen's name come up, and then the more I looked at her, the more I realized that she was actually a really kind of ahead of her time in how she was interpreting these ancient philosophers. Just to give a very brief summary of who they were began in the 3rd century AD with Plotinus, and they sort of like loosely developed Plato's writings, but they were dismissed quite a lot by modern academics and philosophers because of, you know, they thought that they were a bit too mystical, and there were sort of some racially charged suspicions of how like connected they were to Eastern theologies and philosophies. So there, but Kathleen obviously saw through that and really seemed to get the philosophy in a way that lots of our contemporaries just didn't. Yeah, so then she became one of my case studies, and I wrote a chapter in my thesis on her, and now, yeah, as Kirsten said, I'm just finishing, in the next few months, I'll be finishing a book on her, specifically on her and how she sort of draws on ancient ideas of consciousness, mainly Platonic, and sort of weaves that into her own idiosyncratic way, in particularly in her autobiographies and in her essays, and her poetry more generally. But yeah, it's been a wild ride.
A wild ride when she gets into your soul. I think we can all empathise with that feeling in the best possible way. And I know it's true for you, Rebecca, as well, isn't it? Because Within the Living Eye is not the first time that you've engaged with Kathleen's wonderful words.
No, that's right, Kirsten. And can I just say how lovely it is that we're all gathering today on her birthday. Thank you for organising such an event. Very inspiring. Yes, so I'm a composer, have been so for over 30 years of choral music, vocal music, orchestral and chamber works. And though I've set many songs, I'm not a lyricist. I would love to be gifted with the language and words, but I leave that to the other talented people. So quite often I am searching through poetry and quotations and literature just to find that inspiring text to set. I feel there is where my skill lies, rather than creating the words myself. So yes, I stumbled across Kathleen Raine as a student. I think I still was during my master's degree here at Edinburgh University, looking for texts, finding a lot of poetry, in particular 20th century poetry, inspiring, and I just stumbled across her poem, The World, if you're familiar with that one. I'm guessing you all are, but the structure of it, with those key words which kept repeating in a different order, it immediately suggested to me that could be an interesting musical exercise. What if you assigned a specific pitch to each word when it appears? It burns in the void, nothing upholds it, still it travels. Those key words, which reappeared in a different order in each verse, that would you'd end up with new musical phrases each time the words reappeared. So I did that, and then thought, well, then we can explore the harmony underneath it. So technically it was interesting from a musical point of view, but I just found the way she wrote, and I then of course went off and explored many of her other volumes. I just thought she was saying what I felt and wanted to say about the landscape and ecology much more expressively and vividly than I could ever hope to do. It was as if what I felt was right there on the page in her language. I thought, this is incredible. Who is this poet? At that time when I was exploring the world, she was still alive, but I regret never having met or corresponded with her. And now she is no longer with us, but her words will live on. And so when I was given the commission to write for Glasgow School of Art Choir, actually just before the pandemic hit, strangely, I thought this is absolutely ripe for exploring her work again. About 30 years after I'd first dabbled with it, I couldn't wait to get going. So I chose 6 poems from her volumes across her whole career. And it was actually really difficult to narrow it down. I started off with about 10 or 12, and a friend said to me, "How long is this commission?" 10 minutes. You'll never get all those words fitted in. So reluctantly, I had to just break down the list and try and find the ones that said more precisely, more concisely what she wanted to say about the landscape. And I hope I did so. And with Faber's kind permission, their collected volume was out just prior to that, I think. So it was possible to use her words, which I'm delighted with. And I can't wait for it to be recorded later this year so that, as Kirsten says, we can share it with others.
Neither can I, Rebecca. And I think that phrase you used, that she said that she wrote what I felt, I think we're all very familiar with that. And actually, I do have that very Faber copy because we've got the world right here, and I'm not sure if people will be able to see it well, but even the visual poetry of it and the musicality of every literal phrase, it's incredible work. And yes, I'm so thrilled that there's going to be a recording so that we know that we've got people joining us from around the world and that they can all listen and be as moved by the piece as I was. So my next question was actually that, and I have given you guys advance warning of this because it would be something to spring on you otherwise, that I would love for you each to share a kind of treasured memory. So we know that that some of you are blessed enough to meet Kathleen in person, or an archival research find that helps to further illuminate the unique spirit of her life. You okay, Grevel? Have we lost you? Can you hear us okay?
I've lost my video completely. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, yes.
Okay, yeah, my picture's gone. I don't know.
That's relief, isn't it?
That's always the way. It's like too hot for Zoom, apparently. Oh, well, I mean, all I was going to say here is that some of you will already know that Kathleen Raine lived until 95. And I mean, we have an hour tonight, I think a week, a year, I think could never really encompass that wide-ranging, well-read life. We really are, in the words of her beloved William Blake, we are trying to see eternity in an hour here. So my inspiration for this, especially for those who are new to Kathleen Raine's world, is actually the wonderful Temenos book, Lighting a Candle. So this, if you take out a Temenos membership, which I highly encourage you to do if you haven't already, you receive this book, and it's the most wonderful kind of mosaic of memories, of evocations that really, I think, capture the essence of what Kathleen Raine can teach us all. It reminds me, in fact, and let me see, I think I've got it marked, one of her earlier poems, in fact, Mandala. The center of the mandala is everywhere. Wherever the eye falls, the mystery begins to unfold. It is there, the growing point of love. So it's not about a linear chronology, which we could never adequately attempt in the time that we've got, but still giving a sense of everything that she can bring to our lives. So if you can still hear us, Grevel, now I know that you did have treasures to show us, so that would be terrible if we can no longer see them, but perhaps you could talk us through the objects that immediately came to mind for you.
I think Grevel might have left the call and is attempting to reconnect. So I'll keep an eye to let him in when he's back.
Thank you, Tony. So how about you, Jenny? I know that you'll have a kind of treasure. You're sort of deep in the archival research finds at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, so last year I went to California to Irvine, where they kind of quite randomly have quite a lot of Kathleen's papers and diaries. And yeah, there was a lot. There was, I mean, you know, tens of boxes that I worked through, which was fascinating / overwhelming. But I have chosen this, which is from a diary entry. I think in the early 1960s, and I've chosen it. It's sort of, she's comparing. So she's reading Marianne Moore's poetry and Helena P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, kind of together. And this entry starts with Kathleen's response to Blavatsky's really long chapters, and I think it gives, well, I'll read it, and then I think it like gives a sort of insight into Kathleen's personality that maybe isn't always shown, because she's very multifaceted, but I think this kind of gives a lot. Okay, so the chapters. They exhaust me before I exhaust them. Both women. What would they have thought of one another? Lioness and small, if rare, cat. Though to do Miss Moore justice, she might read Blavatsky, disapprove, understand a good deal more than she would let on. I enjoy Blavatsky more, naturally. There is more meat in it. Marianne Moore demands we make ourselves small to enter her glass doll's house. Blavatsky does the opposite, expands us. She would have looked through and through me with contempt at my cowardice. What, she would have said, is a woman of my intelligence doing, entangling with all these shadows, breaking my heart. So I think there's a lot. I think it sort of expresses quite nicely what Kathleen thought literature could do or should do, which is to say expand us rather than diminish us and make us small, and that she thought literature had the capacity to do that as well. But I think it also, you know, like, she had such a sort of self detrimental side to her that was really quite harsh, like it might be way too harsh, and I think that comes through as well, just kind of a really strict code that she adhered to for herself. Yeah, so that's just one bit. I also have one other, like, one sentence that I thought was just funny, and it made me feel better about my life. Okay, my willpower to cross to the desk and to write the necessary letters fails me. The thought of it is like a nausea. I want only to read detective fiction. And then a few lines later, I did cross the room, I did write the letters. I feel like, yeah, made me feel better.
Those are amazing finds,
Good,
Jenny.
isn't it?
My goodness, I mean, you got the thing from the kind of platonic shadows to, what was the phrase, a lioness or small but rare cat?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's just like such a thing, such a kind of, you know, I get what she means, but it's such an interesting image to choose.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Wow, what a find. That's incredible. And you're right, that self-effacing spirit is very much apparent. It reminds me, actually, there's a quote in Faces of Day and Night, which was Kathleen's, actually, I believe it would have been her first published prose work, but it didn't come out. It was written during the Second World War, but didn't come out until 1972 because her very eccentric publisher Canby sort of went out of business / lost the proofs until a later stage. But I think when she's scrubbing the kitchen floor, and you know, if anyone was there to watch me, I would have cried, but nobody's pity but myself. It's oh, that's an amazing find. Thank you for sharing that, Jenny. And Grevel, I was just saying, I know that you got cut off for a moment there, but you have treasures which I, for one, am very, very eager to see.
Yeah, well, one of these is actually something that Kathleen wrote a poem about. So maybe I can show it and read the poem. The poem's not terribly long. I just have to go across the room and get the object, or the two objects, in fact.
Glad you can't see this book scattered everywhere. And at one point we had a Cocker Spaniel on top of them, and it was all a bit hairy. But Jenny, I think maybe people are getting a slight buzzing for some reason from the, is it maybe just maybe it's the aircon, actually. I know it's just a difficult day.
I think it's, I'm gonna switch one laptop up. I think it might, is that better?
Kind of went a bit lower there, I think.
Or maybe my laptop is just dying / on.
I get the feeling they're melting by this point. It's like they've given up.
It's the heat, I think. Okay, so I don't know whether people can see this very well. Can you see this stone? And it has this strange white pattern on it, which is described in the poem. It looks like Arabic or some strange language in characters. Kathleen gave me this, and apparently this was a stone given to her by Gavin Maxwell, which Gavin picked up on the seashore, and they loved it, and he gave it to her. And she wrote a poem about it, which is in her sequence called Soliloquies Upon Love, and it's number 5. Your gift to me was a grey stone cast upon a wild shore, traced over with calligraphy of inscrutable life, a marine annelid with stroke as free as by master brush. One fluent word has written with its life in the record of the Logos, yet lacked senses to see its delicate coils and meanders of white masonry. Mind unknown, that blind plasm signed with weight and drift of sea, of wave refracted light and stress of spirit, omnipresent in every part, universal being here imprinted. The number-loving Greeks built their white temples to Apollo of the measured and Aphrodite the veiled source. Does the same harmony inform those marble shells, the word that is and means always and everywhere the same? Your message of life to life was written on the sea floor before we were, serpentine, strange and clear, the deep knowledge we share, who are not the knowers, but the known. You gave, and I received as beauty what the Logos writes, intelligible, though not to us, the inscription on the stone. It's a wonderful line, and that's the inscription on the stone.
Incredible.
Intelligible, but not to us. Mysterious. So that's Gavin's present to Kathleen on that shore.
My goodness. I think it really
sorry,
sorry,
go on.
No. I was just going to say, I think we've all been sort of touched through her work of the kind of, I can't think of another poet who combines the kind of microcosmic and the macrocosmic.
Yeah.
Activity is absolutely there, and to see the real object, it's quite extraordinary. Exactly,
and then there's a final thing which in fact connects with the final poem in her collected poems, which I won't read because it's much too long, but if you've looked at her poems, you'll know the millennial hymn to the Lord Shiva. Could you support those in case they fall down? Yeah, this is the statue of Shiva that used to stand on her mantelpiece in Paulton Square in London. And after she died, I was contacted by her daughter Anna, who said that Kathleen had left a letter saying that she wanted me to have this, so it was passed on to me. So that is the Lord Shiva dancing, bringing things into being and destroying them again as time changes. I don't know how it came into her possession. I imagine she got it when she was in India and brought it back, but I don't know. Amazing. Anyway, there's Shiva.
Absolutely amazing. And actually, again, the specificity, it's really incredible. If anybody hasn't read, we've mentioned Kathleen's autobiographies several times already, and I'm going to grab my own book now. As Greg was mentioning, India Seen Afar was her 4th and final volume, and again, absolutely extraordinary text. Yet again, light years ahead of her time in terms of the relationships that we can have across the world and the wisdom that we can gain. And I will mention as well, Grevel, that we have a blue plaque application in progress, don't we, for
yes.
Paulton Square?
Yes.
So keep your fingers crossed for that, everyone. Amazing. Now, Rebecca, could we turn to you next? Because I know that you've been sort of heavily engaged with some poems in particular over the past few months, but was there a particular treasure, particular find that came to mind for you?
Well, as I say, it was hard to narrow it down. There were so many amazing ones that could have worked. Another one that leapt out at me was Spell of Creation, which many of you will know. It was the longest of the 6 that I set, but that whole kaleidoscopic thing of coming all the way out from that little kernel, again, it lent itself superbly to musical interpretation, because you could start from barely anything and just work out pitch-wise both higher and lower notes, and with the large forces of a big unaccompanied chorus, you've got a lot of voices that you can do that with. So, and then just again, the imagery, the fire, the bird, the sun, all these things. It was an absolute joy to experiment with that and see what could be done. That's the challenge, I think, as a composer. You are really a servant to the text. You are trying not to get in the way of it. You're trying not to diminish it or interpret it wrongly. You're trying to enhance, well, not enhance, that's wrong, that sounds arrogant. The words are perfect as they are, of course. You're just trying to open up another flavor, I suppose, to make it even more immediate to perhaps readers who don't quite get it on just looking at the text, although I can't think why they wouldn't, but you're just trying to bring another interpretation of it and not get in the way of the text. So it was a thrill to set those words. I just sent you a briefest of messages, actually, Kirsten, about the earlier song I was talking about. Although I can't play these newer works, they don't yet exist, but I do have that tiny snippet of At the Waterfall.
Yeah, please.
That could work if people wish to hear it. And I did make a little recording of The World, the earlier song, but we could save those for the end of the discussion, or
no, I think let's go for it. So
shall I try?
Your computer, are you able to, do you need to share screen now?
I think, would that work? Would audio be best with a shared
screen? On the bottom left, there'll be a tick box to say share sound. If you go for that.
Will I try? So what I could try and share with you is there was a tiny clip of the choir rehearsing the piece At the Waterfall. So if I can get that to work, you'll hear I was trying to get the purity. How can you convey the clearness, the coolness of that water, that's fresh spring water? How can you do that in sound, orally? That's the challenge as a musician. Can it be done with pitch and volume and timbre and all these things? So we'll see. I'll have a go at this. Bear with me.
Thank you. That phrase actually,
share sound.
It's so like, I know that Kathleen herself wrote about being William Blake's secretary at some points in her academic endeavours, so I think she would have understood how you felt.
Yes, what have I got in here? Let's see. Oh, please. Screen sharing, where's the one? I had so many things open, and I'm trying to look for there we go. Forgive me, is that, I know where it was. Forgive me. Is that the one? Oh, is that, my bar's getting in the way. Here we go. So, can you see that?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear? So that was just the opening of At the Waterfall with the female voices, and then I brought in the lower voices for the real guttural effect of the wind and the sound, almost like animal, that line there. So that was very satisfying. I'll stop sharing there to give somebody else a chance.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was just exquisite. I think I've heard too much silence. I've listened too long to the mute sky. And in fact, since I found out about your work, I've been rereading Kathleen's poetry and actually find quite how many mentions of music there are. There's a lot that, of course, there's the harmony of the spheres, but actually particularly those poems written on Cana or for her friends in Cana, there's sort of musical phrases in every sense embedded through them. So thank you. And exquisite singing, I can see that popping up in the chat already. Oh, thank you so much. Caroline, I will come to you now. I think I can guess what your treasure might be, but I could be wrong. So
yeah, I think I may be a bit predictable, but there's you mentioning that lovely book, the Lighting the Candle. It sort of things sort of come back to each other, I suppose. But having gone for afternoon tea with Kathleen Raine to talk about my PhD, it was magical, and just entering the house, and then we went to the kitchen and there were canisters, and she asked which tea we should have, and then she said, oh, these were Muir's tea canisters, you know, and they had a sort of competition of who could blend the best tea, I think, you know, and so it was just wonderful. And so we chose Lapsang Souchong in the end, and then carried it through, you know, from this tiny kitchen, which is described, I think, in some of the essays in that book, or the memories of people, and went in and had this, and then she produced a fruit cake, and she said she'd baked it, and it was all organic ingredients, and you know, she was very, you know, it was really important. It was important. So the whole thing was a ceremony, and I'd been teaching in Japan actually, and had been learning the tea ceremony, and so all of life is infused with the sacred, you know, having the tea. It wasn't just, you know, a cuppa. Everything had a really sort of strong sense of it being important and significant. And of course it wasn't me anyway, but it was that, of course, was the treasured memory, in having the tea and meeting Daisy Bell, and then talking about, we didn't talk about my PhD that much, in fact. She was much more interested in other things, I think. We did a little bit, but she was happy to talk about the poets, and she was glad to talk about them. But again, not about herself very much. When I asked her things about herself, she didn't really want. She was kind of more curious about me. It was very, you know, it was lovely. But what I also liked very much about the Lighting the Candle was Thetis Blacker's bit about cooking and the recipes, and then, you know, that they read Elizabeth David recipes, and it was all this sort of revelation. So and again, about how every meal was a really a special and sacred event, and how all that her ideas, even about her art and poetry, actually were part of her whole life. So that's also, you know, very, very much something that means a lot to me now, to know that also that they were sort of famous, these afternoon teas. So but I only learned that much later on, and so that made it even more treasured, of course. Yes indeed.
Someone else take over. I'm too jealous to talk. It's just the best afternoon there's ever been. Oh my goodness. And I know the chapter that you're thinking of, because I remember that they also discussed these famous fruitcakes that sort of in their background, it was a shouting fruitcake if the currents of the juicy were too far apart, and they're having to shout at each other.
That's right. Yes, they had these sort of, the recipes handed down, and they sort of compared recipes, I think. And
if you were too stingy with the currants, then you had a shouting fruitcake. But Kathleen's never shouted. They were always perfectly spaced.
I mean, I find all those aspects of Kathleen Raine very fascinating. Well, the bit that Jenny read about her feeling nausea about going to her desk, you know, the sort of more informal side. So it was wonderful to read about her relationship with the Campbells on Canna, and that she wrote to Margaret, but they actually wrote cat letters to each other, that from their cats to their cats, you know, and you know, I just thought this was so funny.
Amazing. There's a lot of books already in our world, but this needs to be a book. These cat letters. I know her and Thetis had the cat letters as well. This is just
yeah.
So. And speaking of Thetis, that was the own sort of treasure that I picked out. So for those who don't know, you might be able to see it. I've got it just propped up behind me. Thetis Blacker was one of Kathleen's closest friends, especially in her later years. And to this day, Temenos still run Thetis Blacker Batik Scholarship. So this is an Indonesian art form. You can hopefully get a tiny sense of just how vivid, how visceral the colours are. So a wonderful visual complement to what we find within Kathleen Raine's work. And my own treasure is actually this copy of Blake and Antiquity. So it's the abridged version of Blake and Tradition. Kathleen Raine was the first woman in history to deliver the A.W. Mellon Lectures at Washington DC's National Gallery of Fine Arts. But this particular copy, when I found it online, it's just really, really lucky. It was one that she gave to Thetis, and it has inside actually a letter, just speaking of this kind of informality and the playful side of her too. That it was the book that she wanted to give her with thanks for chairing me. If any of you want to give me a book, that's totally fine. I'm just joking. But what's amazing about it is she said, I have a vague feeling that you have a birthday in this part of the year. I have no memory, but it's some kind of stirring of a sense of the season being yours, even that way to describe it. If not, it's an unbirthday present. And there we are. So, and I should say, if it sounds like I think Kathleen Raine was perfect, I do. But if the one flaw might be her handwriting, I did not anticipate before I started the research. Just she should have been a medical doctor rather than an academic one. Unbirthday in particular, that took me the best part of the day. This is one of the first letters I deciphered. Yes, a very, very distinct hand there. So all of those who've had letters from her, I think you know that. And you mentioned Canna there, Caroline. I think that brings us on really nicely to, particularly given our online home tonight, it feels particularly appropriate actually to illuminate Kathleen Raine's connections with Scotland. So she herself was half Scottish, or to be enumerated about it, 2/4, because both of her maternal grandparents came from up here north of the border. And I spent my Saturday night with my own grandma, who is 90 years young and a dab hand at Scotland's People, which is where we do ancestry, delving into the Scottish side of Kathleen's family tree. And I discovered that her grandparents, Jane Black and Alexander Wilkie, were married at 26 Scotland Street in Edinburgh. There is a wee copy of the certificate, which is about 10 minutes from the Scottish Poetry Library. So if we were in person, we could all go a little pilgrimage there. But I think it's important to state that the meaning of Scotland to Kathleen was not purely or even primarily ancestral so much as spiritual, very much rooted in place and the poetry that she felt was inherent within her mother's heritage, having been born literally in sight of the border. And Kathleen almost felt that she was cosmically tasked with communicating what she termed in her first volume of autobiography, Farewell Happy Fields, as her lost birthright. If I could maybe turn to you, Jenny, I know that you've spent considerable time reflecting on meanings of place in Kathleen's life and the experiences of consciousness that they opened up to her. What's your take on of the meaning of Scotland in her life?
Yeah, firstly, how's the buzzing? Is it better?
That sounds pretty good to me. Yeah, let us know in the comment, but that, I think whatever you've done seems to fix it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think I have thought quite a lot about how she talks about being in exile, partly because, yeah, as you say, she lived, especially in Northumberland, in sight of the, okay, great, thanks, in sight of the Scottish border, and so she describes herself as sort of being an exile, but sort of within spitting distance, really, of where she wanted to be. And I think, like, in my work, I connect that with obviously the Platonian idea of you know, everybody's in exile because we're all we've been born into our bodies, born into generation, and that's the Platonist, not where we're supposed to be. You know, we descend into the body, and then we're supposed to revert and ascend back up into the realm of intellect, away from the world of the senses. So it kind of, like, I read that as this double meaning, really. So she sort of has this kind of, yeah, ancestral connection to Scotland, but it's also a sort of vertical spiritual, like, soul link, and that's what she considers Scotland to be. And I also, like, yeah, love the way she describes, I think she often seeks out people who remind her, so especially obviously Gavin Maxwell, of that heritage, and the way she talks about that birthright, she always seems to refer to her ancestors, and like she describes them. I think I've got the passage here. Yeah, the spirits of my mother and grandmother clamoured in me like ghosts for the lifeblood they had been denied. So it's really kind of visceral, like sort of vaguely Homeric desire to be reunited. Yeah, it's just, yeah, it's fascinating, and I think it works on both a spiritual and a real sort of bloodline level.
Yeah, absolutely. I really liked even that phrase of the vertical. We can sense that so powerfully through her autobiographical work. Like from my mother's side, I inherited, however small a portion, in the memories of Scotland embodied in song, speech and heroic story. In my infancy, the pattern of my life was already indelibly drawn. There began my longing for that legendary land which some call Eden, some Erin, some Zion, some Tibet. I called it Scotland. From Scotland, my people had come. And of course, again, going back to that mandala and the centre, and of course, Grevel's wonderful, the wheel, the circles of life for us all. It's amazing. Rebecca, did it feel sort of important to you or special to you that it was Glasgow School of Art, that it was in Scotland that Within the Living Eye premiered?
Yes, absolutely, Kirsten. I felt not only was I desperate to set more of her work anyway, but it wasn't just a kind of spurious connection. I thought, given that the choir is made up of some of the graduates from the School of Art, many people, sculptors and painters, not all of the choir, it's open to anybody, but given that there was such a visual element there, I thought that would be another nice, meaningful link. And again, the Scottish link, I just felt that was the perfect combination, and that has proved to be the case. Many of the choir members have stayed in touch since then, and not just my work, the other 6 composers who wrote for them, they've loved all the work, but I've had some very nice comments about how some of them didn't know Kathleen's poetry, and they're now going to go away and devour more of it. And that for me is an absolute joy. That was one of the intentions. You know, I did feel this poetry deserves to be known much wider afield, and if it's had that result, then that's wonderful.
Amazing.
So yes,
I think we hope tonight will have a similar effect, because I hate to say it, but my novel research, even sometimes I get the feeling Scotland is lagging behind. We have Poetry Stones and Ullswater Way, we do have the Blue Plaque in progress, but yes, Scotland, yeah, we don't want to bring a dampener on this evening. It's been incredible, but yes, there's more to be done in celebrating Kathleen's legacy north of the border, undoubtedly. And Grevel, I love how actually Scotland was right at the heart of how you first engaged with her work too.
Yeah, just trying to unmute myself. Yeah, it was odd because I had very rarely been to Scotland at that time, and I was only briefly in Edinburgh. And again, there was the book. So in a sense, 2 volumes of the autobiography just popped up out of nowhere. And so the second volume is just forever associated with that particular room in Edinburgh, in the old town. And it's amazing, yeah, just seemed to be at home there somehow.
Under the piano.
Under the piano, which is,
Brown, I think, up here said, if you believe in coincidence, you deserve a dull life.
Yeah, well, it's not the most comfortable place to read a book, but it was good enough. It didn't distract me, and I didn't bang my head. No. I mean, her prose, for anyone who hasn't read the autobiographies, they are absolutely magical and hypnotic. I mean, you can't put them down once you start. It's one of the 20th century's great books.
Very much so. And I know that we're actually, because I'm very conscious of time, I know we've only got a bit, we could clearly go on all night. We could go on until 8 p.m. Australian time. I think we'd all be happy to keep going, but some of you will have places to be. So I think, in fact, we were going to conclude, weren't we? I know that you've each selected a reading as well, really kindly. Before we do, does anybody have any burning questions from our attendees? Certainly we're happy to share our details. So, you know, if you want to discuss any aspects of our work in further detail, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. But if anyone does have that burning question now, please do pop it in the chat, and we can stay on for a few minutes for everybody that can, so that we can hear the work itself, the work that has clearly inspired 5 hearts, 5 souls, and many more in our audience. I don't know if we have any immediate, just lots of praise for that beautiful extract from the choir, Rebecca, so thank you. I think we'll make sure that the Poetry Library will make sure that we get, as soon as the recording's out there, that's shared with everybody. But yes, I think for drawing to a close, and I know this was an impossible task to pick a favourite, so I'm not going to call that a favourite as such, but extract that especially speaks to you. Caroline, I know that you've already shared so much with us, but was there a particular kind of extract that you wanted to share as we're drawn to a kind of gentle close?
Yes, it's very short. With the last letter that I received from Kathleen Raine, she included a Temenos postcard and with this tiny poem. And actually it was the beginning of the talk I gave. It's what got me started, because it's this little house, no smaller than the world, nor I lonely, dwelling in all that is. And it was just that sense of, you know, as you were saying, the microcosm, and then it just expands, you know, to the heavens, to the universe, all that is, and that sense of amazing connection. I mean, it's come to mean more and more to me, because I discovered, having bought The Oracle in the Heart itself for the conference, I then, in the collected, it doesn't say, but with these short poems, Kathleen Raine wrote, so from the Isle of Canna, February 1978, the poems on these pages, unless otherwise indicated, are written in Cumbria, and they're in this little house that she bought, which I visited this year, because I tracked it down, and not far from Banks Head. So it's, I mean, for them, that was walking distance, actually, for Winifred Nicholson and Kathleen Raine. Yes. And the others were written in the Isle of Canna. So I think this little house is the little house in Cumbria. And then, so I really recommend these short poems, because again, they're a little bit like haiku as well. They just have so much contained in just a few lines. So.
Absolutely amazing. Oh, thank you. And we're absolutely privileged to have Winifred, one of Winifred's granddaughters with us as well. So, I mean, I just think we need another event, another hour in that incredible connection.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Caroline. And Jenny, I do believe that you're going to read an extract from a book that I think is in the Scottish Poetry Library. So if anybody wants to follow it up, then they can go and borrow it.
Nice, yeah. So it's called The Underlying Order and Other Essays. And this is from, actually it's from an essay called Nature and Meaning. And I think I think Kathleen was very good at sort of recognizing the importance of non-human creatures and I think this speaks quite well to where we are today. So consider the discrepancy which the materialist standpoint introduces between the variety and scope of feelings and responses of which the human soul is capable. The range and scale of perceptions, intuitions, moods of delight or terror, or the sense of the holy, of the numinous, and the universe, which materialist ideologies present as nothing but a mechanism operating by blind collisions of material particles or forces. For what purpose then, and in what manner, have we come to possess these rich and varied powers, this scale of responses, of modes of experiencing and understanding our universe, and one another? It is as if we were to say of a bird in its shell, that wings, eyes, all the organs of its life to be, corresponded to nothing in its world, nor do they, until the bird takes flight in its own proper skies. So our marvelous capacity for experience must relate to a universe in which the full gamut of these responses is appropriate and valid. I just think it's beautiful. I think of it so much. It's just, yeah, lovely.
Completely, until the bird takes flight in its own proper skies. That's just exquisite. Thank you, Jenny. Rebecca, I'm sure the cogs are turning at these for new musical interludes, but what would you like to share just as we're drawing to a close?
Oh, sorry, say again, Kirsten?
Well, it was just, I think we're just going to do kind of wrapping up, not quite a favourite, but if there was a particular sort of set of lines or poems, which I know you're a dab hand, as we say up here, of selecting from this incredible works, but is there one in particular that really, really speaks to you, that stands out?
Oh, well, like I said, The World, particularly for that quality. Strange Evening was another one I used. The Amethyst Sky, just got so many. It's actually too difficult to choose, isn't it? So many amazing visual images that conjure, and then the dialogue in the childhood poem. I'm just wondering if I've got one to hand.
Well, I can't wait to people hear that, because the way that you compose that, as you say, the dialogue, and in fact, perhaps people might be able to see, I have a print of an incredible Victoria Crowe painting of Kathleen.
Oh, yes.
4 pages of her life. And I think that that dialogue, which as Jenny's touched on in her extracts as well, it was so present for her, both in her understanding of Scotland and her heritage and her work itself. So yeah, I can't wait for people to hear that one too.
Yes, I'm just noticing at the end of my song cycle that I set, the one, and people said, how did you decide what order to put them in? Which was interesting. And again, as a composer, you have to think about the overall structure. It has to make sense. Choosing 6 poems that came from 4 different volumes. I mean, we all know Kathleen. She did have a vision. She was visionary, and it is as though everything she wrote came from that same sensibility. So it wasn't that difficult matching the poems together. But in terms of a narrative structure, when you're composing a piece of music, it did have to flow. You had to have the contrast, tempo wise and mood wise, but the one that just had to come at the end, it was perfect. If I just read the very end of "Say all is illusion, yet that nothing all, this inexhaustible treasury of seeming, the blackbird singing, the rain coming on, the leaves green, the rainbow appearing, reality or dream, what difference I have seen." I mean, has that not got to go at the end? That is at the end. And there's your revelation. So again, as a musician, it was perfect. And you've got all those images, the blackbird, the rain, the leaves, the rainbow. Again, can you interpret those musically? Do they have a particular harmonic or melodic gesture that's going to help illuminate those? And the answer, I hope, was yes.
Absolutely. The answer is certain. Having heard it from myself, Rebecca, the answer is certainly yes. And yes, I know actually towards the end of her life, Kathleen said in a lecture that she felt every poet was ultimately trying to say one thing, one message in a myriad of different ways. And I think that seems to have been your experience of the composition as well. And Grevel, we can't leave without hearing a quote from you. I know it would be intolerable to pick a favourite as such, but was there anything that you particularly wanted to share?
I might just read a few lines from the last poem in the collected poems, the Millennial Hymn to the Lord Shiva, which Kathleen wasn't sure she wanted to include. And I insisted that she must do so, and persuaded her. And it's really about the end of the world. But at the end, despite the sort of all horrors of the 20th and 21st century, which she refers to, it becomes actually a hymn to the great God of destruction, but also creation. So the final little section says, but great is the realm of the world creator, the world sustainer, from whom we come, in whom we move and have our being, about us, within us, the wonders of wisdom, the trees and the fountains, the stars and the mountains, all the children of joy, the loved and the known, the unknowable mystery to whom we return through the world destroyer. Holy, holy, at the end of the world, the purging fire of the purifier, the liberator.
Incredible, absolutely incredible, Grevel. Thank you. Yeah, to the unknowable mystery to whom we return. I think that's really been the spirit of this evening. It's been so special. And I can only do, as we're drawn to a close, I'm going to try and do. Caroline, you had 4 lines. I've actually just got 2. It's an impossible task. I know I've set you an impossible task to choose from this incredible work, but there's just 2 lines that will eternally resonate in my soul. To make the imperfect perfect, it is enough to love it.
Yes.
And I think with that, all I can do is say thank you so very much to our whole panel for joining us this evening. I only wish Kathleen could be here for her birthday celebration to see how much she's inspired you all in all these different paths, different disciplines. Thank you. It's been absolutely exquisite evening. I can't wait to watch it again, to digest it all, and hopefully we'll be able to share it. It's already being shared around the world, which is terrific. And thank you so much to Scottish Poetry Library, to Tony in particular, for taking such brilliant care of us, and for everybody from every corner of the globe. Corner of the globe? That doesn't, no, that's not on theme. Every corner of the map, every part of the globe for joining us this evening. It really has been so special, and I think so special we'll have to do it again next year. I think, shall we just make this an annual one? We'll see everybody here 7 p.m, 14th of June 2024. But thank you so much, everybody. Take care and have a lovely evening or afternoon or morning, or get back to bed, our Australians. Thank you for joining us.